Bird's eye view of a square memorial building with columns at the base, topped by a circular rotunda with more columns. A river at the left, city buildings behind.
It is quiet in a neighborhood of Manhattan known as Morningside Heights.
Black and white photo of the memorial surrounded by crowds of people.
But on a windy spring day in 1897, these streets were packed.
Men in dark coats and hats.
Standing shoulder to shoulder with each other were 1 million people from every segment of society, from former soldiers to the formerly enslaved, gathered together to witness the dedication of the tomb of an American hero, Ulysses S. Grant.
Photo of a man's face with neat gray beard, short dark hair, and pale eyes. Title, Let Us Have Peace, The Life of Ulysses S. Grant. Then, map showing southern Ohio with a red dot for Point Pleasant near the Ohio River.
Hiram Ulysses Grant is born in Point Pleasant in southern Ohio in 1822. His working-class parents, Jesse and Hannah Grant, are eager to secure for their son a good education, and they successfully appeal to their congressman to get Ulysses appointed to West Point. When he arrives, he learns that because of a clerical error, he is registered not as Hiram Ulysses Grant, but as Ulysses Simpson Grant, and the name sticks. After graduation, Grant is assigned to the 4th Infantry just south of St. Louis. It is here that he meets Julia Dent, the sister of his West Point roommate.
Joan Waugh, historian.
She was charming, she was smart, she was funny. To him, she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and they loved each other.
Man and woman talk on porch, then old map showing Texas and Mexico.
Their romance is put on hold when Grant's company is ordered south into the Mexican-American War. In Mexico, the young lieutenant hones the military tactics he learned at West Point, and he gains experience keeping moving armies supplied.
Illustration of army troops in base of mountain. Next, oval portraits of dark-haired man and woman.
After the war, Ulysses and Julia are married in St. Louis. They have 2 sons and relocate as a family to bustling military posts in Detroit and upstate New York. But when Ulysses is transferred to an isolated post in the distant Pacific Northwest, he is unable to bring his wife and children.
You can tell by his despairing letters to Julia, his desperation to make enough money to bring her out, that he was a lonely, depressed man.
You do not know how forsaken I feel here. I sometimes get so anxious to see you and our little boys that I am almost tempted to resign. And then I think, what would I do if you and our little ones should want for the necessaries of life?
Ulysses' intent writes by candlelight. Soon he walks holding a shovel.
In 1854, Grant resigns from the Army and goes home to his wife and children in Missouri with the intention of becoming a farmer. He labors long hours in the fields, struggling against the depressed economy as the nation grows more divided over the issue of slavery.
He chops wood. Then, old photo of a group of black people.
Enslaved people were like any other commodity. They were like horses or cattle.
Edna Medford, historian.
We know that Grant owned one enslaved man, William Jones.
Grant's personal experience with slavery is complicated. Raised by a staunchly abolitionist and politically active father, he has married into a family that owns enslaved people. After struggling and failing to provide for his wife and children, Grant accepts 80 acres of farmland from his father-in-law and an enslaved man named William Jones to help him work it. Yet, a few years later, in 1859, when Grant is enduring some of his worst financial hardships, he does a remarkable thing.
He didn't sell his only slave, he liberated him.
Again, Joan Waugh.
He could have sold the slave his father-in-law gave him for a lot of money.
Emancipation document.
But he chose to free him.
Ulysses leaves field.
In 1860, Grant leaves farming behind. and reluctantly accepts a job in his father's leather business. It would not be long until the nation's growing political tensions would give Grant a new opportunity, and it would shape his destiny.
Illustration of men firing cannons across water at a 3-story building where large plumes of smoke rise.
On April 12, 1861, Confederate soldiers fire on a federal installation called Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. The American Civil War has begun. Grant offers his services to the U.S. Army, and as colonel, leads the men of the 21st Illinois Infantry Regiment into battle.
Civil War battles were chaos, total chaos.
Eric Connor, historian.
Most generals could not conceptualize what was going on the battlefield. Reports would start flowing in. This is happening, that's happening. Grant could see it all somehow in his mind's eye.
He had something that seemed to be lacking in the Union Army among its officers' class, and that is a boldness, that is an aggressiveness.
So he rises in the ranks as a consequence of his ability and his willingness to move forward when other commanders in the field are not willing to do that.
Soldiers carrying muskets.
Grant leads Union armies to victories in Missouri and Tennessee, earning the nickname Unconditional Surrender. He goes on to lead his men to victory at Vicksburg, ending Confederate control over the Mississippi River and turning the war. President Lincoln's confidence in Grant is solidified, and he promotes Grant to General-in-Chief of all Union forces. Grant sees to it that Lincoln's policies are implemented, including the provision for establishing regiments of African American soldiers.
Grant said to his generals, "This is now the policy of the government. If anybody here cannot treat black soldiers fairly once they start joining the army, cannot see themselves commanding black soldiers, resign."
Battle illustration with black men in blue uniforms.
Union soldiers, white and black, ultimately overwhelm the Confederate Army. As the Confederacy crumbles, Grant accepts Lee's surrender at a little village crossroads in Virginia called Appomattox Courthouse. The terms of surrender Grant gives his vanquished foe are generous. "The war is over," Grant tells his men. "The rebels are our countrymen again." Yet Appomattox is only the start of peace.
Rebel soldiers surrender rifles.
Grant is in charge of administering the military occupation of the former Confederate states.
Grant sits at table writing.
There were huge issues to be decided, and Grant was in the middle of all of them. How were you going to welcome the white Southerners back into the Union when they didn't want to be in the Union?
What do you do with the free people? There were nearly 4 million people who had been freed as a consequence of the war effort.
Black couple and soldier stand outside of a house. Etching of Lincoln being shot.
Less than a month after Appomattox, President Lincoln is assassinated.
It would be impossible for me to describe the feeling that overcame me. I knew his goodness of heart, his generosity, and above all his desire to see all the people of the United States enter again up the full privileges of citizenship with equality for all.
Emancipation Proclamation.
On April 15, 1865, Andrew Johnson assumes the presidency.
Grant does not agree with the policies of Andrew Johnson, especially over the issue of rights for African Americans.
Photos of black soldiers.
During the Civil War, his views began to change, and I think, like many other people, it was partly the service of black soldiers. Grant came to appreciate their importance in winning the war.
Photo of Grant seated at table with other officers.
Friends come to him and tell him, if you don't like what Johnson is doing, then you're the one who's going to be able to rally the country, who's going to be able to get people to get over this war and start all over again.
Poster, Grant for president.
Although it is contrary to his unassuming nature, Ulysses S. Grant runs for president in 1868. To the American people, he symbolizes the potential for unity and restoration, and he decisively wins the election with the campaign slogan, "Let us have peace."
Poster with Grant gazing up slogan.
He pardons former Confederate leaders while at the same time embracing Reconstruction, the movement to rebuild the nation while safeguarding the rights of African Americans.
Old photo of black workers, then Eric Fonner.
When Grant came in as president in 1869, Reconstruction was in operation and flourishing. You had biracial democratic governments operating in the South, and Grant thinks this is the correct, logical consequence of the Civil War and the destruction of slavery.
In 1870, President Grant champions the ratification of the 15th Amendment, giving free black men across the country the right to vote.
The problem was, of course, that the white South fundamentally never accepted the idea of black citizenship, of black equality, of black suffrage.
In the early 1870s, white supremacists challenged Reconstruction in South Carolina.
Ku Klux Klan had pretty much taken over and were using violence and intimidation to keep not just the black population in check, but to keep Republicans in check as well, and people who were supporters of the rights of African Americans.
Grant makes an example of South Carolina, sending in federal troops, and the Klan doesn't reappear publicly in the state for decades.
Old photo of a large government building.
To help reinforce Reconstruction's landmark measures, Grant establishes the Department of Justice. During his first term, President Grant also tries to improve the government's policies toward Native Americans. He appoints former aide Eli S. Parker as Commissioner of Indian Affairs. Parker, a Native American from the Seneca Nation, is the first non-white appointed to such a senior federal position.
Frank Scaturo.
He talked about what seemed to be the impending genocide of the American Indian. And he viewed the Indians for the first time as the responsibility of the federal government.
Portrait of Grant.
President Grant passes legislation to stabilize the national economy, and he diplomatically resolves important claims with England. He also establishes the world's first national park at Yellowstone.
Old photo of a river in a deep canyon.
In 1872, Grant is re-elected by a huge electoral majority. For African Americans, there is a great deal of hope.
During Reconstruction, the black church is formed. Black schools are established. Reconstruction grants the vote to black men and gives them the opportunity to serve in public office.
Etching of white men beating a black man.
The problem was violence rears its head again by the mid-1870s. It's very clear that Reconstruction is declining. State after state in the South is being taken over again by these white supremacists. Grant is paralyzed now. He had used troops against the Klan in 1870-71. Now he doesn't feel he can do that anymore.
By the mid-1870s, the North grew very tired of seeing the same old thing, the federal government having to intervene to stop the violence in the South.
Cartoon of King Grant,
As the
pile of
nation
money.
loses the political and moral will to support the cause of equality, Grant's successor, Rutherford B. Hayes, ends the military occupation of the former Confederacy.
And Reconstruction is over. And when that happens, all hell breaks loose. You have lynchings, where you have all kinds of violence perpetrated against black people. And eventually, you have the destruction of the black vote. And you don't have that returning until mid-20th century.
Sketches of black men dropping their votes into ballot boxes.
Reconstruction was a moment of interracial democracy in this country. Its failure was a disaster, and it took another century for the country to get back to the agenda of Reconstruction. Slavery was destroyed, that is true, but equality was not achieved.
Old photos, black family works in cotton field, then men and women wearing aprons gather on a wide porch.
However, Grant ends his presidency with unparalleled esteem.
Old photo, ship with a tall smokestack and 4 masts.
2 months after leaving office, he and Julia embark on a 2-year world tour.
Grant was maybe the most famous American at that moment, even more famous than Lincoln. In England, he was greeted with giant parades of working-class people. This is the man who destroyed slavery.
Upon their return to the United States, Ulysses and Julia moved to New York City, home of their youngest son, Jesse. The former president and the First Lady invest heavily in Jesse's business. But when the company falls prey to a scam, the Grants lose everything. And then, the Grants are dealt yet another blow.
He picked up a peach and he bit into it, and the pain was blinding. The specialists examined him, and he told him that he had inoperable tongue and throat cancer. It was a death sentence, and he knew it.
Facing bankruptcy and a prognosis of 1 year to live, Grant dives headlong into what would be his final struggle, writing his memoirs.
Into this scenario steps Mark Twain.
Portrait of Twain.
Twain had just embarked on a publishing venture, and he offered him an incredible deal that formed the partnership that would be so famous and result in the 2-volume memoirs.
Old photo, men on porch.
At a cabin in the Adirondack Mountains, and weighing less than 100 pounds, Grant completes his manuscript just days before his death at age 63 on July 23, 1885.
He wins this victory, this race against death, and he also, in his final act, is able to provide for his family. It's an act of love.
Grant writing wrapped in a blanket.
During Grant's last days as he was dying of throat cancer, the one condition that Grant really insisted upon regarding his burial is that there be a place at his side reserved for his wife.
Old photo, tidy rows of white grave markers.
Because the nation's military cemeteries did not at the time allow women, the Grant family chose a burial site in New York City.
Funeral parade on city streets.
Grant's funeral in New York in 1885 is the largest assemblage of people recorded on the North American continent up to that time. 1.5 million in a city of nearly 2 million.
Large crowds line street.
The procession stretches for miles, from City Hall to Riverside Park.
Grant's death led to a giant outpouring of sentiment all around both North and South. Grant becomes the symbol of the Civil War and its importance in American history and the end of slavery.
Grant memorial poster.
The funeral procession was attended by virtually the entire government. Every living president, the entire cabinet, the entire Supreme Court, virtually the entire Congress was there. His pallbearers included not only his comrades on the Union side, but also Confederate generals.
Casket on raised dais under black pavilion.
The Grant Monument Association is formed immediately after Grant's death to raise funds and establish a fitting final resting place. 12 years after Grant's death, after the largest public fundraising campaign in history up to that time, the memorial is completed.
Old photo of the memorial, square base with columns at front and side, and a circular rotunda.
The classical granite and marble-domed mausoleum rises 150 feet above the ground. To this day, the largest such memorial in the country.
Current view up columns to rotunda.
On April 27, 1897, the grand building is dedicated. And 5 years later, Julia is entombed next to her husband.
Marble tombs side by side.
Grant's memorial soon becomes New York's #1 tourist destination, drawing 500,000 people every year.
Old photos, crowds at the memorial.
But as the 20th century wears on, Grant's reputation begins to fall, in part due to a growing movement sympathetic to the Confederacy.
Soon, image of printed poem, The Lost Cause.
In the lost cause interpretation of the Civil War, the South never lost, and the cause of the war was not slavery, it was states' rights.
Then fast forward 25 years, and World War II begins to lead to a reevaluation. Sometimes there are entrenched evil systems that cannot be dislodged by any other means than violence. Then a guy like Grant rises in reputation.
View of memorial's front, stone eagle with wings outstretched on a pillar.
We continue to rediscover Ulysses S. Grant and his historical legacy.
Visitors look up, then interior of the Rotunda Dome.
The Union was saved, and despite everything, it survived. The restored Grant Memorial is a part of that. It's ground zero in really coming to terms with Grant, the man, the soldier, the president, the citizen, all in one place.
View up past fluted columns.
Today, the General Grant National Memorial is managed by the National Park Service and is open to everyone. It is a sanctuary to the story of America and the enduring ideals that bind our nation together.
View of memorial front with paved plaza and stone eagles on either side of steps. Produced by Northern Light Productions for the National Park Service. Directed, produced by Lenny Rotman. Written by Ben Abishai. Cinematography, Jesse Beecher, Esther Cram. Northern Light team, Mike Majoris, Tim Raycraft, Ben Abishai, Taylor Dewicki, Zoe Gregoric, Shane Butler, Emmett Eisner, Michelle Lee, Morgan Bandy, Jim Mackey Young, Andy Kukura, Tim Lay. Motion graphics, James Carlson. Original music score, Andrew Willis. Surround sound mix, Mike Majoris. Narrated by Rosa Howard. Grant voiceover, Shane Morris. Featuring Eric Fonner, Edna Green Medford, Frank Scaturo, Joan Waugh. Reenactors, Hurt Fields, Ben Camp, Una Miller, Lena Moody, Matt Suberin de Chouanière. Costumes, Lionheart Filmwork. Foreign languages, Blue 105. Harpers Ferry Center, Amber Codges and Mark Southern, executive producers. Abby Wickline-Bain, project manager. Stephanie Morris, project specialist. Sheila Spring and Jason Albright, contract specialists. General Grant National Memorial, National Parks of New York Harbor. Shirley McKinney, Superintendent. Lorena Harris, Deputy Superintendent. Liam Strain, Education and Training Director. Ramon Manuel, Supervisory Park Ranger. The National Park Service Arrowhead logo.